I always figured birthdays stopped feeling special after childhood. No more balloons, no big parties, and if I was lucky, maybe a text from someone who remembered I existed. Still, on the morning I turned 26, a small part of me hoped for something, anything that resembled kindness. The apartment was quiet. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the upstairs neighbors. My 2 roommates had already left for the day, not that they would have cared it was my birthday. We barely exchanged words, unless it was about rent or whose turn it was to take out the trash. I made myself a cup of instant coffee and sat by the window, scrolling aimlessly through messages. Nothing from Mom yet, not even the usual "love you, sweetie" from her. She must have forgotten. I stared at the silence of my inbox for a few seconds longer than I wanted to admit. And then, 3 sharp knocks on the front door. For a split second, I thought maybe someone remembered. A surprise, maybe a friend with a cupcake, or even a delivery I didn't expect. But the man on the other side wore a brown uniform, clipboard in hand, expression like stone. "Jordan Ellis? Yeah?" He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served. Eviction notice. You have 7 days." My stomach dropped. I blinked, not quite processing. "I what?" "Everything's in there. Contact your landlord if you have questions. Have a good day." And just like that, he turned and walked away. No explanation, no warmth, just an official doing his job. I stood there for a full minute before I shut the door. The envelope trembled in my hands as I opened it. The words were cold, legal, brutal. Unpaid balance, breach of lease, immediate action required. I sat back down, the coffee now cold beside me, heart thudding like a drum. I hadn't paid full rent, true, but I'd explained it to Callahan. I'd told him I was waiting on payment from a freelance job, and it was only a matter of days. He'd nodded, said he understood. Apparently not. Here's the thing. I wasn't a bad tenant. I didn't throw parties, didn't damage anything, didn't even play music loud, but that didn't matter. All that mattered was money. And when it was late, people like Callahan didn't wait. They struck. So on my 26th birthday, instead of cake or company, I got an eviction notice. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I paced the apartment trying to think. Who could I call? My mom was barely making ends meet herself. My friends, most were struggling too. And the roommates, they wouldn't lift a finger. They probably knew this was coming and just didn't care. I checked my bank account, $173.47. I laughed, a bitter, sharp laugh that made my throat sting. Happy birthday to me. I spent the rest of the day pretending not to cry. I told myself it wasn't the end of the world, that I'd figure something out. But by nightfall, the weight of it all was crushing. I sat in my bedroom, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked since moving in last year. My bookshelf, once a source of comfort, felt like a mockery. I didn't know what to pack first or where to go. Outside, rain started to fall. It tapped against the glass like a reminder. You're alone in this. I curled up under the blanket, my phone glowing in the dark. No missed calls, no texts. Not even a happy birthday. That was when the thoughts began to shift, from panic to something else. I thought about Callahan, about how quick he'd been to send that notice, how he hadn't even called or warned me. And then I thought, what if this wasn't the end? What if this was the beginning? But I wasn't ready yet to act. Not that night. That night, I just sat with the storm outside and the storm inside, the two of them mirroring each other, each drop on the window sinking with a beat of anger in my chest. That was how it started, not with a plan, but with a feeling I couldn't ignore. The next morning I woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream, but the envelope was still on the table. The rent notice still screamed at me from its stark, unforgiving language. 7 days. 7 days to pack my life, find somewhere to go, and disappear from this place like I never existed. I stared at the paper for a long time, then opened my laptop and typed out a message to Callahan. Polite, respectful. I reminded him of our last conversation, how I'd told him the payment was coming, how I just needed a few more days. I even attached the emails from the client that showed they'd approved my invoice, just waiting on the funds. No response. So I called. Straight to voicemail. By noon I was pacing. I tried calling again. And again. Nothing. I walked down the block to his property office. Locked. No sign on the door. Just a by appointment only notice. I knew what this meant. He wasn't going to wait. He didn't care. He wanted me gone. Probably wanted all of us gone. Word around the building was that he was planning to convert half the units into short-term rentals, more profitable, less messy. People like me, freelancers, gig workers, we were just placeholders until someone richer came along. I should have seen it coming, but when you're struggling, hope has a way of clouding reality. You think if you're nice enough, honest enough, people will give you grace. That maybe decency still counts for something, turns out it doesn't. I called the client who owed me money. They apologized. Said they were processing it soon, that their accounting department was behind due to the holiday weekend. Of course, the irony of it all, getting evicted on your birthday while someone delays your paycheck over a federal calendar you don't even benefit from. By late afternoon, I was sitting on the floor sifting through my belongings, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to leave behind. I pulled out old sketchbooks, clothes I hadn't worn in years, kitchen gadgets still in boxes, my life in fragments, pieces of memory, none of them useful now. My phone buzzed, a message from my mom. "Hey, sweetheart. Sorry I missed your birthday. Things have been rough, love you." I stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I didn't reply. That night, I made myself a bowl of instant ramen and sat in the dim kitchen. One of my roommates walked past, nodded, then kept going. Not a word. He probably knew about the eviction too. Maybe they both did. Maybe I was the only one surprised. I wanted to scream or punch a wall or break something. Or break. But all I did was eat in silence, the plastic fork bending in my hand like even it didn't have the strength to hold me up. I tried sleeping, but my mind was on fire. Thoughts racing. What if I ended up on the street? What if I couldn't find work? What if this one mistake snowballed into a life I couldn't escape? I kept hearing Callahan's voice in my head. Not even his real voice, just the version I imagined, cold, smug, detached. I pictured him in a suit, laughing at people like me, people who worked all day and still couldn't afford to exist. And that did something to me. The shame twisted into anger, and the anger started to take shape. But it was still a distant ember then, not yet a flame. All I knew was that something inside me had snapped. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just about being evicted, it was the way it happened. No warning, no second chance, just a notice, a deadline, and a silent door. I stayed up late scrolling through housing forums, Craigslist ads, subreddits for displaced tenants. Most of what I found was bleak. Couch available for a week. Basement with no windows. $900 for a shared room, no kitchen access. I closed the laptop and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I was losing everything, but I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Not to him. The day I left the apartment, the sky was bright and cloudless, mocking me. I had 2 duffel bags and a backpack stuffed with what little I could carry. The rest I'd sold, donated, or thrown away. I closed the door behind me without looking back. Tasha was the first person I reached out to. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since we'd drifted apart after college, but she was always the kind of person who helped without asking too many questions. She answered my message within minutes. "Yeah, you can crash here for a few days." Her place was small, 1 bedroom, with a futon in the living room. She gave me a blanket, some tea, and a slice of leftover pizza. I nearly cried. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. The first night I didn't sleep much. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of her building, trying to stop my mind from racing. I replayed everything over and over. How I got here, what I could have done differently, what I should have seen coming. The second night, I offered to cook dinner, just spaghetti. I wanted to give something back. Tasha smiled and said it was good to have me around, even if just for a while. But I saw the look in her eyes. She was being kind but also calculating how long she could afford to share her space. By the third night, her boyfriend came over. He didn't say it outright, but the tension in the room made it clear. I didn't belong. I thanked her, hugged her, and left the next morning. I moved into the basement of a guy named Eric, a friend of a friend. He had a setup for gaming down there, wires everywhere, stacks of soda cans. He didn't ask questions, just pointed to a futon by the washer and said, "Don't touch my stuff." I kept my bag zipped and tried not to breathe too loud. Days blurred together. I bounced between cafes for Wi-Fi, applied to every freelance gig I could find. Some days I made $50, others nothing. I skipped meals, stretched coffee into hours, and tried not to look like I was loitering. Every night I lay awake in the dark, trying to quiet the voice in my head. It told me I was failing, that I was invisible, that I'd always be stuck like this. One night the washing machine started leaking. Eric blamed me, though I hadn't touched it. He yelled. I apologized. I packed up the next morning. I spent a few nights in my car. It was a rusted Honda I couldn't afford to maintain, but the back seat folded down flat. I parked near a 24-hour grocery store, kept a knife in the glove compartment, and prayed I wouldn't be noticed. That was when it really started to sink in. I wasn't just broke, I was homeless. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. My eyes looked hollow. My skin was pale. I hadn't shaved in days. I wore the same jeans 3 times a week, washing them in bathroom sinks when I could. I'd wake up drenched in sweat from panic attacks. My chest tight, my heart racing. I'd sit upright, gasping, convinced something terrible was about to happen. But nothing ever did, at least nothing worse than what I was already living. The worst part wasn't the instability or the hunger. It was the shame. Shame that I hadn't made better choices. Shame that I couldn't tell my mom, couldn't ask for help. Shame that I once thought I'd make something of myself, and here I was, couch surfing, half-starved, invisible. I kept thinking about Callahan. His face, his name, his signature on that notice. I wondered if he knew what happened to the people he displaced, if he even cared. Probably not. To him I was just a late payment, a file, a nuisance to be cleared, and the more I thought about that, the angrier I became. It started to replace the fear, the anxiety. Slowly, that burning sensation in my chest stopped being panic and started becoming fuel. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't stay like this. Something had to change. I was sitting in the corner of a downtown library, hunched over my laptop, trying not to fall asleep. My eyes burned from lack of rest, and my fingers ached from typing out cold pitches to freelance boards that probably wouldn't respond. My mind was drifting, somewhere between despair and numbness, when a recommended video popped up on the sidebar. How I bought a house for $4,500 at a tax auction. I almost laughed out loud. Clickbait, clearly. Another internet fairy tale designed to lure desperate people into a false sense of hope. Still, I clicked. The guy on screen looked average. Jeans, hoodie, slightly awkward in front of the camera. But his story was bizarrely straightforward. A rundown house in a neglected neighborhood had gone up for auction due to unpaid property taxes. He bought it. Fixed it up, sold it. Profit 5 figures. I didn't believe half of it, but something about the tone made me curious. So I kept watching. Then I watched another. And another. That night, instead of scrolling through job boards or rental listings, I stayed up until 3 a.m. deep diving into the world of tax lien sales, foreclosure auctions, and distressed properties. I read city codes, skimmed county websites, learned the difference between a sheriff's sale and a tax deed sale. I wasn't sure why I cared. It's not like I had any money to buy property, but something about it fascinated me. The idea that the system, as brutal and unfeeling as it was, had loopholes, cracks where the overlooked and forgotten could find a foothold. And then I stumbled on something unexpected. Callahan's name, not in a news article but buried in a property lien database. Turns out he owned more than just my old duplex. He had at least 7 properties in the city, some under LLCs, others under his name directly. One of them had a tax lien posted only 2 weeks earlier, a big one. I double-checked the address. It was an old Victorian-style house near City Park. Abandoned for years according to neighborhood forums. The previous owner had died without a will, and the estate was a mess. Callahan had been trying to acquire it for months, but the taxes hadn't been paid in over 5 years. My heart started to race. I didn't fully understand what I was reading, but it looked like the property might be headed for auction, and if that happened, anyone could bid on it, including me. The idea was absurd. I didn't even have a stable place to sleep, let alone money to invest in real estate. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fear or shame. I felt power, even if it was just theoretical. I printed out every document I could find. Public records, ownership history, tax balances. I mapped the location, made notes, highlighted key terms I didn't understand. I started keeping a notebook, pages filled with scribbles, questions, leads. I wasn't just dreaming, I was planning. The next day I took the bus to the house itself. It stood like a forgotten monument. Tall, grey, peeling paint, windows boarded, yard overgrown. A chain-link fence circled the lot, but part of it had collapsed. I walked around the perimeter, trying to imagine what Callahan saw in it. Probably location, resale value, proximity to the park. To him, it was just numbers. But to me, standing there in the shade of its decaying frame, it felt like possibility. I talked to a neighbor who was trimming hedges next door. She said Callahan had shown up a few weeks ago, talking about restoring the house, but nothing had happened since. "He's just another slumlord," she muttered. "They always say they're gonna fix it, but they never do." I thanked her, then walked away, my mind spinning faster than ever. Was this my shot? Could I really do something about it? It still sounded insane, but crazy didn't scare me anymore. Homelessness had already taken my pride, my comfort, my sense of safety. What more could I lose? I spent the next week researching auctions, calling city offices, sitting in on online webinars about tax sales. I learned that if a property owner fails to pay taxes long enough, the county can auction the deed, and anyone with the funds can win. Anyone, even someone like me. Everything I'd read about property auctions made one thing clear. It was a brutal world. The moment a tax deed auction opened, seasoned investors with deep pockets pounced like wolves. They had teams, spreadsheets, bidding algorithms. They didn't care about the history of a house or the people who used to live there. It was business, pure and cold. I was stepping into that world with no money, no experience, and no backup plan. Just a binder full of public documents and a hunger that had long since devoured my fear. I needed help, not encouragement, not moral support, real help. Someone who knew the terrain and wouldn't laugh me out of the room. I remembered a post I'd seen on one of those real estate forums. A guy named Mitchell commented often, always detailed, never condescending. His replies stood out, direct, honest, like he wasn't trying to sell you anything. I messaged him, didn't expect a reply, but 3 days later, I got one. "Meet me at Peabody Cafe on 14th, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Bring everything you have." I almost didn't go, thought it might be a prank, but when you're sleeping in a borrowed garage and surviving on granola bars, you show up. Mitchell was older, late 60s maybe. Wore a brown corduroy jacket and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He introduced himself without ceremony, sat down and asked, "So, what's your angle?" I told him everything. The eviction, the couch surfing, the house Callahan was eyeing, the tax records, my theory that it was about to hit auction. I even admitted I didn't have a dime to my name. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You've got fire. That matters more than money sometimes." Mitchell used to be a property attorney, retired 5 years ago after a mild stroke. Said he still dabbled, mostly to keep his mind sharp. "Helping one underdog a year keeps me sane," he added. I became that underdog. For the next few weeks, he coached me like it was life or death. We met in libraries, cafes, his tiny office above a laundromat. He gave me reading lists, explained the legal difference between lien and deed auctions, walked me through how to read title histories and identify clouded ownership. I took notes obsessively. Every night I reviewed them until I passed out. Mitchell had access to databases I didn't even know existed. He confirmed what I'd found. The property was indeed nearing auction. The county had posted the pre-notice, which meant the clock had started ticking. Callahan hadn't paid off the tax bill yet. Maybe he was stalling, maybe he thought no one else would notice. We were going to prove him wrong. Still, knowledge wasn't enough. I needed cash. Mitchell helped me brainstorm. I sold my old design gear to a pawn shop, took every odd freelance gig I could. I even offered to clean offices at night. Little by little, the money added up. Mitchell matched what I raised, said he saw potential. Call it an investment. You win this thing, you'll pay me back. If not, I'll write it off as charity for my karma ledger. Together, we calculated a modest bid, not enough to compete with the sharks, but just enough to slip under the radar if the house didn't draw too much attention. Mitchell warned me, though. The auction room, whether online or in person, is no place for amateurs. You'll be outgunned, outmaneuvered. These people don't blink. But I wasn't afraid. I'd already been stripped of everything. I wasn't doing this for profit or prestige. I was doing it because someone had tried to erase me, and this was my way of writing myself back into the story. We registered my account for the online auction. I triple-checked the system, made sure my credentials were verified, that my bank transfer was cleared. The night before the auction, I didn't sleep. I walked through the empty streets until sunrise, thinking about everything that led me here. My old apartment, the rain, the silence on my birthday, the look in Tasha's eyes when I left. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation, and I was ready. I used to think playing dirty meant breaking rules. But in the world of property and power, the dirtiest moves are the legal ones, just buried deep enough in loopholes that no one notices unless they're looking. And trust me, I started looking. By then, I'd memorized every line of the tax deed code in our county. Mitchell taught me how to dig into Callahan's LLC filings, and sure enough, his strategy was always the same. Delay tax payments until the final notice, then swoop in last minute to pay off the balance and scare off any potential buyers with intimidation or legal threats. It was a tactic, and it worked. Most people didn't want trouble, but I wasn't most people anymore. I started scanning the forums Callahan frequented. Real estate threads, investor chats. He wasn't shy about sharing his successes. Under his username, CS Stone Holdings, he bragged about flipping distressed homes and tricking new landlords into thinking they were inheriting quiet tenants before jacking the rent. One thread caught my attention. He mentioned the exact property I was eyeing, claimed it was in the bag, and that he just needed the auction to go through the motions. He said there were no threats, no competition, just a waiting game. That was when it clicked. He didn't think anyone else knew. He thought he was alone at the table, and that made him sloppy. I created a burner account and joined the discussion, asking leading questions, acting green, fishing for clues. In one reply, he slipped up and mentioned he planned to show the place to a potential investor in a couple of weeks, meaning he hadn't paid off the taxes yet, and he was stalling, as always. Mitchell and I went into high gear. He filed a Freedom of Information request to confirm no payments had been made. I mapped the area again, spoke to more neighbors. One of them told me a group of teenagers had been sneaking into the abandoned house at night. That gave me an idea. I printed out photos of the damage. Broken windows, graffiti on the siding, makeshift fire pits in the backyard. I took the pictures during the day, made sure everything was documented with date and timestamps. It wasn't sabotage, it was visibility. A reminder that the house was not some golden egg. It was a liability for whoever owned it. Then we drafted a disclosure report. Technically, I wasn't required to submit anything, but Mitchell said the more I knew, the more valuable, or dangerous, I could seem. I emailed the city auction board, asked clarifying questions, submitted my findings about the state of the property. Made sure my name and interest were on record. It wasn't just due diligence, it was strategy. I wanted Callahan to know someone else was watching. He must have caught wind, because 3 days before the auction I got an email. No greeting, just one sentence. "You're making a mistake." I didn't reply. Then came the voicemails, first polite, then hostile. One said he'd make sure I never bought property in this city again. Another accused me of trying to smear his name. I saved them all. Mitchell laughed when I played them for him. "Good," he said, "means he's scared." And fear was leverage. The day before the auction, Mitchell and I reviewed every detail one last time. We had the documents, the cash, and the plan. If Callahan tried to play his usual game, wait until the final hour to pay off the taxes, we were ready to counter. I wasn't there to win a bidding war. I was there to get in low, quiet, and fast. Let him think the house was still his. Let him get comfortable, then hit. But what really made the difference wasn't paperwork or preparation. It was resolve. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it to reclaim something they'd tried to steal from me. Not the apartment, not just my dignity, but my place in the world. My right to exist without being crushed under someone else's boot. I'd played by the rules, worked hard, stayed quiet. Look where that got me. So now I was playing their game, but this time I knew the rules. The auction was quiet. That's what surprised me the most. No last-minute drama, no flurry of competing bids. Just a few clicks, a brief waiting period, and then confirmation. The house was mine. Well, legally mine. Emotionally, I still couldn't quite believe it. I kept refreshing the confirmation email, reading the words over and over. Winning bidder, Jordan Ellis. It felt like a prank, or a mistake the system hadn't caught yet. But it was real. Mitchell smiled and clapped me on the back. Told you, fire gets it done. We filed the paperwork, got the deed processed, and scheduled the official title transfer. It all moved faster than I expected. For once, bureaucracy worked in my favor. Then came the best part. Waiting. I didn't call Callahan, didn't brag, didn't gloat. I let him stew in silence. Let him believe the house was still part of his empire. Let him continue making plans with his investor, whoever that was. People like him never imagined someone could beat them at their own game. So I waited until the day he had scheduled a viewing. I knew the date because I'd kept monitoring the forum where he bragged. He mentioned showing CP Victorian to a buyer interested in heritage flips. CP Victorian, City Park Victorian, my house. I got there an hour early and parked on the curb. I wore my best clothes, what little I had left that still fit. I printed the deed, the tax confirmation, the county seal. I held the folder in my hands like armor. Callahan pulled up in a sleek black SUV. His suit was sharp, his watch probably worth more than the car I used to sleep in. He stepped out with a confident stride and a phone glued to his ear. Behind him was a woman in a tan blazer, likely the investor. They started toward the front gate, still damaged and rusted. That's when I stepped out. Callahan looked up, froze mid-sentence. He squinted, confused, then recognition hit. Ellis? I smiled. Good to see you, mister. Callahan, what the hell are you doing here? Waiting, I said, holding up the folder. This property doesn't belong to you anymore. He laughed, dry and dismissive. Nice try. I already filed. No, you didn't, I interrupted. You didn't pay the tax lien. You waited too long. I have the deed. This house legally transferred last week. Your rights to it expired. He stepped closer, face tightening. That's impossible. County clerk confirmed it. Mitchell can verify everything. You remember Mitchell, right? The guy who returned your calls with silence? His investor looked between us, clearly unsure what she'd walked into. Is there a problem? Callahan snapped. It's handled. I handed her a copy of the deed. You're welcome to verify it. I own this property now, which means he brought you here under false pretenses. She looked at the papers, took a photo, then turned to him, face unreadable. You didn't tell me this place was already flipped. It wasn't, he snapped. It was, I said calmly. On my birthday, you gave me an eviction. Today, I'm giving you a reminder. Some of us don't stay down. Callahan's face flushed. You're playing with fire, kid. No, I said. You did. You just finally got burned. He took a step back, then forward again, hands clenched. For a second, I thought he might actually swing, but the investor put her hand on his shoulder. Don't, she said sharply. They left in silence. No threats. No final words, just the screech of tires and the sound of his empire cracking a little louder. I stood there for a long time after they left, staring at the house, still a mess, still in need of repairs I couldn't yet afford. But it was mine, not as a trophy, as a promise, that no matter how far they tried to push me down, I'd always find a way back up. I didn't celebrate. There was no party, no champagne, no triumphant playlist, Just silence and the slow creak of the front door as I walked inside the house I now legally owned. The air was stale, the floors dusty. A raccoon had clearly made a home in one corner. The roof leaked in 2 places. There was mold creeping along the edges of the ceiling, but it was mine. I stood in the middle of the empty living room and felt something I hadn't felt in months: stability. Even if the walls were falling apart, even if I didn't know what tomorrow looked like, I had a key in my hand. I had a legal document that said I belonged somewhere, that I mattered. I didn't have money to renovate, not even close, but I had time and my hands. And the quiet kind of stubbornness that grows in people who've been underestimated too many times. So I started cleaning, scrubbing, bagging debris, pulling up warped flooring, removing broken glass. Day by day, hour by hour. I worked until my fingers bled and my back ached. I patched holes in the walls with whatever I could afford, borrowed tools, watched tutorials, bartered design services in exchange for supplies. Mitchell helped when he could. He brought me a box of nails, a portable heater, and once, miraculously, an old window frame that fit the front bay exactly. I don't know how he found it, but it meant more to me than anything else. Neighbors started noticing. A woman named Raina brought over soup one afternoon and asked what I was doing. "Fixing it," I said. "Most people would just flip and leave." "Yeah," I replied, "I'm not most people." She nodded. Came back the next day with more food and a toolbox. Word spread. Soon others stopped by. People who lived on the block, tired of watching their street rot while investors sucked the life out of it. One guy offered to help with electrical. A retired carpenter helped reinforce the porch. Someone left a box of paint rollers on the steps. It wasn't a renovation anymore. It was resurrection. And with every nail, every patch of plaster, I felt a little stronger. Like I was rebuilding not just a house, but the version of myself they'd tried to erase. I posted updates online, not for clout, just to document the process. I shared before and after photos, wrote about what I'd learned. The response surprised me. Comments poured in, some from people who had been evicted, others from young workers stuck in impossible rental cycles. A few asked if they could help. That's when the idea hit. This house didn't have to be mine alone. What if it could be more? A space for people like me, people who'd fallen through the cracks but hadn't given up. Not a shelter exactly, but something between. A place to land when the world turns cold. A place that says, you're not broken just because you're struggling. I talked to Mitchell. He said it was ambitious but possible, so I started calling local orgs, explained what I wanted to do. Some didn't take me seriously. Others listened. A few offered small grants, materials, volunteers. I turned the upstairs rooms into temporary living quarters. Nothing fancy, just warmth, safety, and dignity. A shower that worked, a kitchen that functioned, a bed. I made a website, wrote my story, called the project Second Door, because everyone deserves another chance to walk through one. Within a month, we had our first guest, a 19-year-old kid who'd aged out of foster care and was sleeping on benches. I gave him a key. He cried. We ate pasta that night with cracked plates and mismatched forks, and I realized I wasn't just healing the house, I was healing myself. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but because I knew how it felt to be invisible. And I was done letting people like Callahan define who mattered. At some point, I stopped checking on Callahan. I didn't care what he was doing, who he was suing, or how many deals he was still trying to close. The man who once towered over my life had become irrelevant. His voice no longer echoed in my head. His power over me had vanished the moment I chose to stop reacting. The truth is, I thought I wanted revenge. I thought that if I could just make him feel a fraction of the helplessness he made me feel, I'd be free. But revenge doesn't heal. Purpose does. When I handed that 19-year-old kid his key, something shifted inside me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting just to survive. I was building something. Creating space for someone else to breathe. And that filled me in a way that anger never could. More people came. One girl had fled an abusive boyfriend. Another was a student who'd been couch surfing for months, terrified her professors would find out she was sleeping in her car. Each one came with a different story, different pain, but a common thread. They'd been told by circumstance or by people in power that they didn't matter. At Second Door, we flipped that script. There was no bureaucracy, no endless paperwork. Just a warm meal, a safe bed, and someone to look them in the eye and say, "You're not alone." I spent days repairing walls and nights listening to stories that broke me wide open. I learned to listen without judgment, to hold silence when words weren't enough. And in that stillness, I found something I didn't know I needed. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning. The kind that comes from letting go. I started going to therapy. A local counselor offered sessions at a reduced rate after hearing about the house. We talked about the eviction, the humiliation, the months of instability. We talked about the version of me who used to tie his worth to a paycheck and an apartment lease. I began to see how much of my identity had been built around scarcity, around fear, around proving myself to people who never deserved to hold that power. Now I was rebuilding from a different place. Mitchell kept checking in. He said I'd done more in 6 months than most developers managed in 5 years. But I didn't feel like a developer. I felt like a survivor who got tired of surviving and started living instead. One day, I passed by my old building, the duplex. It had a new coat of paint, a new set of names on the mailbox. I stood there for a minute, taking it in. The place where I'd been evicted, humiliated, pushed out like I was nothing. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt distance. I'd outgrown that version of myself. People started writing about Second Door. First a blog, then a local news outlet. They called me a community advocate, a housing activist. Labels I never asked for but had somehow earned. I kept things simple. Still cooked in the same beat-up pots. Still mended sheets when they tore. Still sat on the porch most evenings, watching the light change across the cracked sidewalk. We planted a garden, just tomatoes and herbs at first, then bell peppers, then sunflowers, tall and wild, like a declaration. We're still here. One night, Raina asked me what I was planning next. I didn't have an answer, because for once I wasn't planning for survival. I was living in the present. Healing wasn't a finish line. It was this mess, this beauty, this imperfect grace I got to witness every day. And maybe that's all I ever needed. Not to get even, just to feel whole again. A year passed. 12 months since that knock on the door, since the envelope, the notice, the beginning of everything. And this time when my birthday came around, I didn't wake up with dread. I didn't check my phone for apologies or avoid looking at the front door, afraid of what might be waiting. Instead, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. Jules, the student who once slept in her car, had made breakfast. She lit a candle from the dollar store and stuck it in the stack like it was a cake. "You didn't think we'd forget, right?" I laughed. I actually laughed. Not out of irony or pain, out of joy. We ate together in the kitchen, all 6 of us, crowded around the scuffed table that had seen everything. Laughter bounced off the walls. Someone spilled orange juice. The dog we'd unofficially adopted barked for scraps. It was chaotic and warm and real. After breakfast, I went out to the porch and sat in my usual spot. The air was crisp, the kind that whispers change. A couple walked past and waved. The sun hit the side of the house in a way that made the peeling paint look like gold. This was my home. Not the kind that comes with gated entries or marble countertops, the kind that grows out of perseverance, out of defiance, out of love. I thought back to the moment I stood in the rain, holding that eviction notice. How small I felt, how disposable, how easily they thought they could erase me, and now my name was on a deed. Not just to a house, to a life I had built myself. Second Door wasn't a project anymore. It was a movement. We'd helped 17 people transition to permanent housing. We were talking to local officials about expanding the model. A grant came in, then another. Mitchell said we needed a board of directors. I just wanted to keep the water hot and the doors open. But it was growing because people were tired of waiting for the system to fix itself. Because people believed in something better. Because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to disappear. I got emails from strangers, messages that said things like, "Your story gave me the courage to leave," or "I didn't know anyone else felt this way." One girl wrote, I thought I was the only one trying to survive silently. That one hit me hardest, because I remembered that silence. I remembered the nights on the floor of Tasha's living room, the darkness in Eric's basement, the cold leather of my car seat, the ache of invisibility. And now, here I was, visible. Not because I shouted louder than everyone else, but because I stopped hiding. I never got an apology from Callahan, didn't expect one. Last I heard, he was tied up in a lawsuit over a failed flip in another county. Investors were pulling back, reputation catching up. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was about healing, about finding worth outside of money or status, about turning survival into service. People still ask me if I'd do it all over again, if I'd go through the eviction, the chaos, the instability, and honestly, I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. But would I erase it? No. Because it made me. It broke everything that needed to break so I could rebuild stronger. Not alone, not for revenge, but for the kid who shows up at my door, eyes hollow, clothes in a plastic bag, thinking it's over. I get to tell them, it's not. I get to hand them a key. I get to be the proof, and that is more powerful than anything Callahan ever owned. So yeah, on my birthday they gave me an eviction, but I gave myself something better, a future, a home, a purpose. And if you're still here, listening to this, maybe you needed to hear that too. If this story moved you even a little, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories that remind you there's always a second door, always a way back. And if you want to hear another twist that'll give you chills, click the next video on the screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.